Okay, thank you everyone again for joining. And I will start. Okay, so I'm not going to talk in details about myself. I just want you to take note of my contact on the left. So after this session, if you have any question, comments, or you want to follow up with me, you can contact me with any of these. So we'll be covering these topics that how you can level up your skills in these areas from on-premises to cloud. And the good news is that even though you hear all the chatter in the social media, or if you read different posts, blog posts and whatnot, most stuff today is valid and you can reuse it. If you have been working on the on-premises SQL Server or SQL Engine or data platform, pretty much everything is still useful, and you need those. In some cases, you probably have to think a little bit differently um, than the way you think today. And of course, there are some areas that all of us have to learn stuff, that are brand new, and you have to learn from scratch. So my goal in this about 55 minutes is to tell you most of the stuff that of course, I'm not going to talk about those, but where the differences are, what are some of the new skills that you can acquire so you are ready to also manage resources related to data platform in Azure. And even though the title really does not mention about Azure, it says about cloud, but I will be talking primarily about Azure platform. And if you have any question, like Prince says, put in the chat and I'll make sure that I attend those. So before you embark in your journey in cloud or in Azure, you want to move your databases or you want to use some resources around data platform, this is one of the slides that you definitely want to understand, think about it, talk to your peers, and then you decide where you want to go. So on the top, what you see is there SaaS is software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, and of course, you are probably on premises because you need to decide as a company or if your client have to decide as a company what are the controls they want to give up and what do you mean by that, because depending on what platform or where you land out of these three options, some of the controls you have to give up to your cloud provider. So this is a decision that you shouldn't be taking alone. You want to talk to all parties like your security team, your risk team, if you have a high availability disaster recovery team, your business owners, right? The stakeholders, your developers, everybody needs to be on board and agree on that. And you do not want to start moving your resource till you figure this out. This is absolutely important for everybody to get on board and, you know, to be on the same page. So the first thing I want to talk about is a provisioning, because, before we do anything, we need SQL servers, hardwares, right? We need compute, network, storage, and all that. Now, on premises, we only consider data centers and we also consider some geographical location, right? For high availability and disaster recovery. But now we have other things to think about. Region, which is still a geographical, location. You need to think about management groups, subscription, uh, resource group. You want to know if your region has availability zones, and a lot will depend your company's overall network design in cloud, because there are different models, and also how you want to set up your billing, which is a big thing. If you just want one bill for the whole company, things are a lot easier. If you want different billings for different business units, you want to probably think about this before you start deploying your resources. Now, a lot of stuff I'm going to talk about, in the interest of time, we're not going to go into details of this. I'm just trying to give you tips, but most of this stuff that I'm going to show you, you'll see that if you click on most of these things, they will take you to a URL and where you can read more. And again, like I said, if you have any question, please put in the chat. So this slide shows a hierarchy of some of the terms that I just used, right? So your management group is at the top, and then subscription resource group, and your resources belong to or bundled within a resource group. How you bundle your resources in a resource group is another discussion that you want to have with your stakeholders, right? Um, do you want to just put your SQL Server and the disks and stuff in one resource group, but then other things that are going to interact with that individual server, uh, do you want to put everything in one resource group, or you want to keep those separate, right? So these are some of the discussions that you probably want to have as a bigger team. You just don't decide it by yourself, go too far, and then find out that you have to, walk back, and you have to redesign again, right? That'll be painful. Now, on premises, when we were used to installing a new SQL Server, so we would talk about, what kind of hardware we want, what kind of storage, how much storage I need, and you want to, select a version of OS, right? Either on Windows or in Linux. But now you have many more options, right? When it comes to SQL Server. And I even purposely omitted some of the choices from this slide. Like, I know today in the Data Weekender, there is a lot of talk about Fabric, Synapse, Analytics Workspace. I'm not even going there, right? The data warehouse part. And also, you don't see the, hyperscale here. I mean, Azure SQL Database covers the hyperscale, but I'm not going to talk about much on that. So when you are moving a SQL Server from on-premises, you have many more options. Now, what you're seeing in this slide, even within these, we have more things to consider, right? So if you just, pick anyone, I'll show you both, two of the examples that it can lead you to, more other things that you need to decide um, before you really, select one. So one good thing when you are going to the cloud, that even if you made some, your estimates were a little bit off on the sizing for compute or for storage, when we are on premises, we already bought the hardware, it has been racked, and started moving, and you realize, no, this is not something I wanted, this one is too big or too small. You're really not in a good situation, right? Especially if you need a bigger one, because you probably, plan to have it at least for 3 years. In cloud, the good part is you can scale up or scale down at will, right? So even if your estimates are a little bit wrong, that's not the end of the world. With taking a very short downtime, you can always scale up, scale down, or move to a different SKU altogether for your, most of the resources. In general, I'm speaking. So let's take two examples and, go a little bit deeper and see, what kind of options that I'm talking about. So if we talk about like SQL on Azure VM, which is the IaaS, infrastructure as a service model. Now here, I can, just give me 1 minute. Why can't I see my, okay. So here I have many more options, right? As you can see here, I can deploy it from the marketplace. I can just get a VM and install my own version of SQL Server. I can also have a choice of lift and shift with Azure Migrate. So I can do that too. And I can decide what version of operating system or SQL that I want to deploy. If I have SQL Server reporting service, integration service, analysis service, I can have all those here. I can also enable an extension, which we call an IIS extension, that can automate my backup, even though there are some restrictions with those backups. You definitely want to, read those. You cannot, yeah, like there is no differential backups, and the retention also has uh, some limitation. And like I said, you can scale up and down and shut down if you don't need it, right? So you can have a development VM that you can shut down at, whenever you're done with work and restart it. It takes only a couple of minutes. You can use pretty much all high availability and disaster recovery solution that we are used to on premises, right? And then if you just go to Azure SQL Database, which is a PaaS model, you see now we get into more different options. Here, I do not have a choice of major version of SQL. Like in case of a VM, I can say I want to install SQL Server 2022 or SQL Server 2019. When you go to Azure SQL Database, it comes with preloaded SQL binary, and you don't have that option. And you don't, it's always on the latest and greatest version. You can only change the compatibility level, but you cannot decide what major versions of SQL Server you're going to use. So that's a different way of thinking. When you go to purchase, you have two different options. You can either go with a database transaction unit, what they call DTU, versus vCore or virtual core. And even under the virtual core, you have, you know, different things to look at. Like there is service tier, there's compute, hardware configuration. You can go with the reserved uh, instances. You can go with reserved database storage. You can also, uh, yeah, and then there is no backup for you to take if you choose to go with Azure SQL Database. And there are two different type of backups, of course, point in time and long term. Your job is only to tell Azure per database how much backup you want to retain, and that's it. You are done. Again, as I've said a few times, with any other resources, you can scale up, scale down. Uh, there are some built-in HA high availability and disaster recovery capabilities that comes with depending on what tier you are deploying. So you need to now decide, is that enough for me, right? And what do I mean by that, right? You want to go to the business owners, you want to show them RPO, RTO, what they get, what kind of redundancy they have. Do they have a redundancy at the region level, or at a zone level, or at a data center level? And then what are the SLA for those? And if that's not enough, then you can set up your own HADR. And most solutions are pretty much what you see on the on-premises today with always an availability group. Pretty much same technology they are using over there. There's a new thing that you want to be aware of when you're moving your databases to cloud. This is called log rate limits. Uh, the only way Microsoft can guarantee the SLA is by limiting your logs. And there are, a couple of other things that Microsoft uh, will control, right? Depending on what tier you are buying, how much money you are spending, what kind of compute you want, right? Based on this, of course, CPU memory and your IO bandwidth. But even once they give you those, they still have to make sure that you do not generate enough transaction logs that um, that Microsoft cannot copy to the other places to guarantee the SLA. So that's something. There are new wait types you want to be aware. If you see a slowness in your app or someone is saying we are running slow, you want to make sure that you are not capping at your log transaction rate. So now we talked about provisioning. Now let's talk, move to the migration phase. What are your choices? So when you migrate a SQL Server, if we are on premises, of course, we can, go and upgrade to a newer version. But when you are moving to Azure, you have multiple options, as you can see in this slide, right? And you need to decide where you want to go. But before you decide, you need to know a bunch of things, right? What's your limitations? Uh, what you're looking for in terms of features, what you have today, what you need in Azure, and all that. But once you have decided that where you want to go, how do you migrate, right? What are the tools you're going to use? What are the process that you follow? So for migration, there is Azure Migrate Appliance that you can deploy in your on premises in one of your virtual, if you're using VMs, you can deploy it there, and that Migrate Appliance will automatically find all your SQL engine, and it will analyze, and it will tell you which ones are ready to migrate to what platform. So what do you mean by that? You might have a database that it will tell you that you can migrate to Azure SQL running on VM, SQL Server running on Azure VM. You can migrate to Azure SQL Database. You can migrate to managed instance. So it will give you a picture of all your SQL Server state, and it will also tell you if you have features that will block you from migrating to cloud. So the Azure Migrate Appliance do that. It tells you about your readiness, what size you need, um, and it also give you your cost estimation and all that. And it can work with VMware if you're using Hyper-V, or even on the physical servers. You can use on any of this appliance. So once you're done with your analysis, you can use, there are many different tools. One of the one is Azure Database Migration Service. This is under Azure Migrate. This will probably be your primary tool to migrate. But again, I'm not saying that you have to just be restricted to one. You definitely have other options. Uh, Also in Azure Data Studio, there's a new extension called Azure Database Migration. This is pretty much Azure Database Migration Service. As of now, I checked recently for another talk, you can migrate to Azure SQL Database offline, but you can migrate to managed instance and SQL Server running on VM. You can do those both online and offline migration by using this service. Uh, you can use this, as you can see in the slide, from the portal, PowerShell CLI, or the extension I just talked about. Now there are other tools, and oftentimes um, migrating schema is pretty easy because you can use many different tools. And there is one thing called, you will hear this term a lot once you start talking about migration or you start preparing. It's called backpack and DACpack. These are Windows file with these extensions, and a deck pack has all your schema. A backpack has schema and data. There are many different tools that will let you to create this kind of files. You can do it from management, SQL Server Management Studio, SQL package.exe, and there are other ones. So migrating schema is pretty easy with a backpack file, or you can script out your schema and you can deploy it. The hurdle that people face most is the migrating your data. So for that, there are, of course, we don't have time to go into details, but you can look at Azure Data Factory, SQL Data Sync, transaction application, and there are other tools that you can look at. If you have a smaller size of database, you can definitely, use, like do a offline migration if you can take a shorter downtime. But if it's a large database, you probably want to look at what I showed in the previous slide, the migration service with online migration. So now, it's pretty seamless. It lets you do a first a restore without recovery of your full backup, and then you can keep rolling forward with subsequent T-log backups, and at the end just take a shorter downtime and you can do a cutover. Any question, Prince, so far?
Not yet. So guys, you can please paste your questions out here on the chat if you have any.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So I'll keep going.
Yeah.
So once you migrated, how do you monitor your Azure SQL databases or databases in Azure? And I put these two together because even for performance tuning, we need to know what we want to tune. So unless you have a good monitoring tool in place and find out where things are going wrong, or things are slow, things are not in accordance with your baseline, you don't know what to tune, right? So you first have to have a robust monitoring, and then you can go with tuning. So in Azure, there are certain things that will be collected automatically for you without you doing anything. If you see in that slide that I put at the top, there is a yellow box. What is that is say? What that's saying is, I can automatically, get those insights, right? They will be, getting collected automatic. Metrics is another thing for pretty much all resources. Up to 30 days, metrics always get collected. And what do you mean by metrics? You can compare this pretty much with the WMI counters, like Windows WMI counters, right? I want a single piece of information. What is my CPU at 4:24 a.m.? So those matrices get automatically collected. And then as a database operations engineer or DBA, whatever you call data engineers, you can also set up to collect more, like audits, diagnostic settings, which I'll talk about a little bit more. And then you can send those to your log analytics workspace, event hub, or storage account. And then there is activity log, which also get collected automatic. Now, whether it gets collected automatically or you set up a collection, these are all good. Now I have all this data sitting, but how do I know that something is wrong, right? So that's something you have to set up by yourself. And I'll show you a little bit more of a high level how you can do that. So besides this, we also have the traditional DMVs, the management views, and the dynamic management functions uh, that we've been using in on-premises SQL Server 2005, I believe. Yes. So, some of those are still there even in Azure SQL Database. But there are some new ones that you want to be aware. If I have to give you an example, there's one called sys DMDB resources stats. It collects continuously CPU, IO, and memory consumption for Azure SQL database every 15 seconds. And I think it maintains about 1 hour. And then there's another one called sys.resources stats catalog view in Azure SQL database, which collects, which actually aggregate the same data from DMDB resources stats, and I think it aggregates every 5 minute interval and keep it for 2 weeks. So that data is already there. So if you see a slowness, instead of you trying to write your own query from the collections that you have, you can just query those, those DMVs and get insight. For Azure SQL managed instance, there's one called C server resources stats. Pretty much it does, the same thing that I'm talking about. So some of these are automatically there, collected and aggregated for you, but you have to know that which ones are there that you are not, you didn't use on premises, right? So there are some new ones that you want to look at. And there are some built-in tools uh, that you can use. These are data collected, sorry, aggregated, and also presented, in a nice format. So if you go, if you look at Azure SQL database, uh, the matrix is, as I said, already is collected for you. You can just in the portal go and say, I want to see this metric for last 24 hours. I want to see, I don't know, average, min, max, and whatever you want. There is a performance overview dashboard built in for you. Shows you a bunch of stuff. We don't have time to go into details. And there are performance recommendations. It tells you if there's a missing index that if you create, it can help you. It also gives you some recommendation for dropping index that's not being used. Be careful before you drop it. Make sure you know that it's absolutely not being used, because you might have reports that running maybe once in a month and you need that index. So be careful. There are some preview features also in performance recommendations, like a parameterized query recommendations. Um, this is mostly if you have one or more queries that are constantly being recompiled, but you are getting the same execution plan, it will give you a warning there. And then there is a fixed schema issue recommendations. It's still in preview, but I think Microsoft is going to deprecate that. And then Query Performance Insight is another tool that you can look at. It actually already aggregate all your data, and it can show you your top 10 or your top queries by CPU, IO, or log IO. It also shows you your long running queries, and you can also run some custom query against that to see your top consumptions, by different way that you want to see. There's also a automatic tuning feature which is not new. Automatic tuning is also available in the on-premises since SQL 2017. So it can give you some recommendations for force plan, create index, drop index, and that kind of. So you can automate some of those if you want to. So there's another tool called SQL Insight. This is similar to what I was saying 2 slides before. This is still in preview. So SQL Insight, as you can see on the left, it pretty much worked for all flavor of SQL Server in Azure. So once you set this up, it will gather everything for you. You will have a collection agent, and then your logs and your metrics, they all get into the log analytics workspace, which is a column store index, highly compressed, and it's already indexed for you. And on top of that, you can do anything you want. You can set up your alert. Uh, you can do you can create a workbook to look at insights, and you can pretty much you can set up webhooks with your monitoring. If you want to scale up, scale down, you can alert. like there's more possibilities, right? You can integrate this with Azure Functions or even run books, or do whatever you need to, right? So, but you need to set this up at the first place, right? To collect everything. So this is probably a famous slide. You probably have seen this. I copy pasted. I put the URL at the bottom from Microsoft website. The concept of security really doesn't change. What do we know today on premises? All the threats that we think about and we work on to mitigate, they're all valid, even though you're moving to cloud. One thing is that your physical security of your data center, your devices or hardware, you are giving it up, right, to your cloud provider. So you need to understand that, and that's obvious. But the other challenge now become you're in a shared public space, right? Before you were in your own data center, even if you are renting it, you had your own space to yourself, isolated from others, other tenants. But now you're not anymore. You're sharing it with others. So it's a joint responsibility between you and your cloud provider. Uh, but now we have more real-time monitoring. We have more services to monitor for security threats and anomalies, which is good. But the key for you is to understand what does what, enable those, configure those, know your baseline, and set up alert when things go wrong, right? You have all these resources, but if you haven't set it up, you haven't configured, uh, you do not know your baseline, you do not know when to get alerts, these are of no use, right? Then you are exposed. So I listed a bunch of tools here. In the previous slide we talked about, there are 4 layers. Even, leave the physical part because we don't have any control once we move to somebody else's data center. So for the network security, firewall is something not new to us, right? Even on premises, we use it. Uh, but there's something called private endpoint uh, that you want to use. And for private endpoint, it will mask your public IP address. You don't need to use it. People don't see that anymore. Whatever your public IP address, people don't know. You get a private endpoint. So anybody wants to connect to your SQL server or your SQL Server engine, they should come over the private endpoint. Uh, Access management, I don't think so. It changed a lot from what you know today from on premises or in the cloud. You still have authentication, authorization. You want to, do some access control. You have to decide. So they're all there, but there are some new mechanisms, that can make your life a little bit easier that I'll talk about in subsequent slides. Threat protection. So you have auditing and threat protection. So you want to take advantage of those. And then we also have database encryption, backups, physical security, which we'll talk about a little bit more. What are the tools that we have? So Azure SQL auditing, you can turn this on from portal or through PowerShell. It does a lot of stuff for you. It collects a lot of data uh, that you can either set alerts on, or if you see something wrong, you can go and query. Ledger is something, if you need a temporary evidence on certain tables in your database, you can turn this on. And you can assure your business partners and you can show evidence that this data or these tables hasn't been tampered with, or vice versa, right? If it's tampered with, you have solid evidence that how it was done and who did it. Uh, you have to first enable it in a database level Then you can select individual tables to do that. And to turn on ledger, you will need a storage account. Database discovery and classification are built into Azure SQL Database Managed Instance and also in Synapse. Supports four kind of things. You can find out four different things. I'm not going to go into details, but there are built-in classifications that Microsoft can go and look at your schema and classify your columns uh, um, for you. And you can also have your custom classifications that if you want to, label that way. Uh, uh, so you can have your own labeling. And then you can also turn on Defender, which you have to pay. To give you an example, for each Azure SQL database is $15 per month. And Defender give you two things. One is a vulnerability assessment, and one is a live threat protection. Pretty cool. A short example: if someone connect to your database, say like from IP address that haven't done it for say like weeks, you can automatically get a real-time alert that so and so IP is trying to connect to your database, and then you can go and you can see all the details and you can decide, whether this was legit or not. One thing, sir, I'm going to go back with the data discovery and classification. There's another service called Purview. If you use that, um, it you can see the overall, in your whole company, um, all your data assets, in different places. And, if you want to find out with this level, what are my, data? So it will show you, SQL Server, or you have data in your storage account. Uh, you can find all this in one place. And also there are actually two different models that which I did not mention. One is called a SQL Information Protection Policy, and other one is a Microsoft Information Protection Policy. So if you go with the Microsoft Information Protection Policy, you can have uniform classifications across the board with other apps, within your tenant. So I talked about, a little bit of authentication and authorization and, user accounts and all that. There's something called user assigned managed identity, which is pretty cool in Azure. That way you do not have to deal with, uh, with passwords and, with your credential details. If you start using Azure assigned managed identity, nobody needs to see your password, and you can also um, yeah, you do not need to pretty much save your password in password safe, and people have to retrieve and put it in their connection string or not. They don't have to do that. And for database encryption, we are used to this, TD, transparent database data encryption, and always encrypted. They're both there, and you can do this with your own managed keys using Azure Key Vault. There's one cool thing that you can do once you move to Azure is the Azure role-based access control. Uh, what this does is Microsoft has built-in roles for your different resources. Or they also have a Active Directory roles, which we call it Entra right now. I know nowadays. And then you also have database specific roles, right? Today we know on premises, right? Uh, and you can also create your custom roles like today we can do. So the good part is, so if I take an example, you can have SQL DB contributor, which is a built-in role, or say SQL Server contributor role. These are built-in roles in Azure. If you make someone member of a SQL DB contributor, they can manage your database, and They can manage the security related policies in database, but they really cannot see your data. They cannot query data. So same with the SQL Server contributor. If you let someone, be member of this role, they can manage your SQL Server database, but they cannot access the data. And so, which is pretty good. So you want to look at these roles, and there are some new ones Microsoft also rolling out at a server level and database level. So you want to be aware of those, right? These are, like SQL DB contributor, SQL Server contributor. These are not available. You don't see those in the on-premises SQL Server. And then there's something called privileged managed identity, which is pretty cool. So even if you make someone member of a role, you can set this up that they have to elevate themselves every time they want to use that privileges in that role, or the functions there in that role. And you can make it, you can customize this, right? You can set the minimum, you know they can get it for 30 minutes, the maximum is X number of hours. They have to, have a reasoning, and which is a mandatory. So people have to elevate themselves for a certain period of time, and you can track those, right? So these are traceable, who elevated, for what reason, and for how long and whatnot. So you can go back and trace those back. This is something we don't have right now, for on-premises, built in. Any questions so far? Okay. So I talked about alerting a few times, right? So I talked about data collections. Now, once you collect all this data, right, um, from metrics, logs, everything, you have it in a storage account, event hub, log analytics workspace. But how do you know if something is going wrong? So you need to set up your alerts. First, of course, you decide what you want to alert on. And I think that knowledge that you gain on premises can be useful, right? Nothing is we know what are the things we want to know in a SQL server, what are the things can go wrong, and we want to know. So we already, we have pretty good idea. But you probably, you want to baseline again once you move to a different platform. Once you did your baseline, you know what you are alert on. So you define your condition. I want to know on this resource, like as you can see in the example here, that my CPU utilization above this percentage for X number of minutes. Right here it says, if it's over 80%. So you put your conditions and you schedule how frequently you want to evaluate this. And when that condition is met, it will generate alert. Now, what it is going to do after it generates the alert, based on your action group, what kind of action you want it to do. And here we have more options than we have on premises. I mentioned some of these before. You can get a text, you can get a phone call, you can get an email, of course. You can have a message sent to your Teams page. You can call Azure function, runbook, webhook. There are unlimited possibilities you can do. Uh, so all this will be, today, we use something called Azure Log Analytics Workspace, and from there, Azure Monitor. All these are going to be bundled into the um, SQL Insights, which is in preview right now. So these are a couple of, services, or there's a couple of things that you want to be aware, right? You want to know this before you set your alert. Um, we talked about alerts and actions, metrics. Yeah, we pretty much touched on all this. On the right side, one is a logs analytics workspace. So this is a new thing called KQL, and KQL is a broad term. People can use it as a custo engine. Microsoft has a service on the Kusto engine. There's also something called Kusto query language. So you probably want to look at that. If you want to write your own custom alerts, you need to be proficient in Kusto query language. There are, I think today I saw there is some sessions, I think, with the KQL and Fabric. I have a whole separate talk on this. Look it up. It's not very difficult or not very different than the T-SQL. Now, some of the alerts and actions, right? So we are used to SQL Server agent jobs, right? To let us know when we deviate from our baseline. Uh, in Azure, depending on what is where you migrate to, like Azure SQL Database does not have built-in SQL Server agent. So how do you get this working? So there's a couple of alternate services that you can look at. You can look at Elastic Jobs, Azure Functions, Azure Automation, Data Factory, PowerShell with the scheduler. Or you can just write KQL on top of your repository, right? So where all your logs and metrics are saved, you can write KQL, and from Action Group, you can set it up from there. But if you want to collect something, custom, or you want to have custom alerts, like the way today you have with SQL Server Agent, you can look at some of these solutions. Elastic Jobs does not support PowerShell scripts as of today, which is, uh, you know, um, which can be a problem for some people if most of your alerting and monitoring today is based on, PowerShell code. Networking. So I think this is one of the topic I think most on-premises database professionals will have challenged to upskill. Uh, because when we are on premises, we are rarely involved with networking, unless some of the consultants are probably. But if you are working in a bigger company or bigger shop, you are probably not doing that, right? You have probably siloed different network team, and they are doing the work for us. But when you move to cloud, you definitely want to have some basic understanding of how networking works. And also you want to get involved initially if you're making a new journey to the cloud, your company, how network is being designed, because uh, you definitely want to understand this. Otherwise, and if you don't know how they're going to, design the network, um, it'll be very difficult for you to know where to put, things, because things have to talk to each other. They have to be bundled together. They will be able, they will need, holes to reach out to each other. Otherwise, they cannot talk. So, I just pick a couple of things that I thought important that you should know, but this is definitely not exhaustive list. There are many other network components. If you're making a cloud journey, you definitely want to read and understand. So virtual network, uh, that's the fundamental building block of your private network in Azure. So virtual network is, it's a service. It enables you to securely communicate with each other, right? Because as I said, you have a server, you have to talk to storage, you have to talk with other services to talk to. Um, so you definitely want to read, a little bit about virtual network. And then network manager, what it does, it actually let all these virtual networks to put together, right? You use a network manager. Uh, it brings, your network security, your routing functionalities all together. Express route enables you from your own premises, if you still have a data center, to connect this to the Microsoft's or your other cloud provider through a private connection. Because oftentimes you're not going to move everything in one day, right? Suddenly you don't get up in one morning and say I'm shutting down my on-premises data center, everything is in cloud. That doesn't happen. You'll probably be um, in a hybrid situation, right? You have your on-premises, you're slowly moving there. So express route can help you keep, you have a dedicated private, and these are, provided by, some of the big companies, like in US, like, like Verizon, AT&T, these kind of companies. Azure Bastion is a service that you can deploy that can let you connect to the virtual machines that you deploy in cloud using your browser. I find it very helpful, especially in your test phase. If you are getting blocked or something, you can use that. For Azure SQL database, as I'm talking more into, in terms of database, these are some of the stuff that you want to look at, right? You definitely want to disable, your public network access. And I talked about private endpoint. You definitely want to set up private endpoint and let people connect through private endpoint. And then again, you want to check your, set up your firewall rules. And then you also have outbound, sorry, you also set up your outbound networking. So your outbound networking will control that what are other services that your Azure SQL database can connect to, right? Uh, and then the TLS version, it's not it's not just dependent, not in Azure, even on premises. With the SQL Server 2022, there are a bunch of places that you need a certain minimum version of TLS. So you want to be aware of that. Cost control is a big thing in Azure, right? Cloud will not be cheaper unless you know how to manage your cost. So don't think so that you're moving into cloud, you're going to save money. So you definitely want to look at a couple of tools that I mentioned here. Uh, and then you want to know, we call it a, reserved instance. If you know that you definitely need a resource for next 1 year or 3 year, you can buy reserved instance. You can get up to 72% of discount. Uh, and then there is savings plan for compute. So if you know that you're definitely going to be using this kind of compute uh, every hour, you can pre-purchase and then you can save up to 65%. So up to that level, you pay a discounted rate. If you go above that, you just pay for the pay as you go rate just for the one that you went above. So you can save a lot of money. For your licensing purpose, you want to look at what's Azure Hybrid Benefit that lets you reuse the licenses that you bought for on-premises. There are three calculators that I listed here. I also put the URLs. You definitely want to look at those, and those calculators can help you to when your business owners or your app owners come and ask you, hey, can you tell me if I'm going to move this SQL server with all these databases to Azure Managed Instance or a VM in Azure or Azure SQL Database, how much I'm going to pay? How do you know? So you can go up and use some of these calculators, and you also want to tell them that if you want to commit for 3 years, you can get this discount. If you cannot, if you want to just commit for 1 year, you can still save some money. Even on the storage, if it's over a terabyte, I believe, you can also buy reserved instance. So you want to, get familiar with these calculators. And then you also want to know a couple of things, right? Dev test pricing. If you know this is for development and testing, you want to make sure that you deploy it in that way. There are deployment options, as you can see in the slide, that you will be paying almost 62% savings. You take advantage of the auto scale. You do not, like on premises, you are stuck, right? You bought this huge server, you racked it, cooling, and now you are stuck with it, right? Because you already bought it. You cannot do anything. You cannot scale it down. Here, you do not have to do that. So I talked about like Azure monitoring. You can call an Azure function from your monitoring and say, now the demand is high, scale up. Now the demand is less, scale down. Some of these, depending on what resource you're talking about, there is some a small blip you'll see in the service. So you want to make sure that your business can sustain that. You have to talk, you have to design around it. There's something called elastic pool that you want to be aware. So Azure SQL database, each database has its own resource, but in elastic pool, you can bundle bunch of databases and you can say all of these databases are going to use this much resource and they'll share with each other. There's something called Azure Advisor. You want to visit that because this often will tell you where you have a chance to save some money. So a shameless plug, if you're going to be in Seattle in a week or
Yeah,
week and a half,
yeah,
yes,
just just for the time control. 9:58.
yep,
Just for
yep,
okay.
yep.
Okay.
So a shameless plug, if you are going to be in Seattle for Past Summit, we have a 6 sessions in a learning pathway that will go into details of all of these topics that I just touched. So if you happen to be there, look this up. And here are my contacts again. If you want to, get in touch. And I thank you. And enjoy the rest of the sessions.